everybody, and welcome back to Paranormal Community College. Merry Christmas and happy holidays to all of you. My name is Riley, and I have some more Christmas ghost stories and legends for you guys today. But before we get into things, just a quick announcement. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that I don't have video this week, and I probably won't for at least a couple weeks. The reason being is I'm on vacation, and I'm also in the process of moving, so I don't know exactly when I'll be able to have video again, but the show must go on, and I will continue to have episodes every week, every Tuesday. I just may only have audio for now, so bear with me. But anyway, so last week we talked about some Christmas ghost stories. So if you haven't listened to part one, make sure you go back and do so. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about some more Christmas ghost stories, and I'll also be sharing some legends from Northern Europe, such as Iceland's Yule Cat, the werewolves of Yule, Krampus, of course, and much more. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please don't forget to like, follow, or subscribe. Tell your friends and family about it, and follow me on Instagram. All of that is very much appreciated, and without further ado, let's talk about the Brooklyn ghost on 136 Clinton Avenue. It all began one cold December night when Mr. Edward F. Smith heard the doorbell ring unexpectedly. Mr. Smith was a man of means with a wife and two daughters. Built in 1910, the house in question is a beautiful Greek revival with four large columns on its facade. At over 2,000 square feet, the house consists of 4 bedrooms and sits on a 6,300 square foot lot. And the first ring at the door came around 9 p.m. that very night. A little late for a visit, thought Edward, but he put on a warm robe and walked towards the front door. Well, upon opening the front door, Edward was a bit annoyed to find no one at the door, but didn't think much of it. Perhaps he was hearing things, or perhaps the late night caller realized they had the wrong house. And with that, Edward went upstairs, got into bed, and fell asleep soon enough. But at some point in the night, he was awoken by another ring from the doorbell. I'm just going to ignore it, Edward thought to himself. Perhaps it is just a prankster, and surely I'm not getting out of my warm bed in chilly Brooklyn December to answer another phantom caller. He tried to go back to sleep, but again he heard the doorbell ringing. This time it sounded urgent. He assures his wife that everything is okay and again goes downstairs to answer the door. And who does he find on his doorstep? No one. Not a soul. Shutting the door, Edward contemplates what is he going to tell his wife to reassure her, to calm her down. What is he going to tell himself about the pesky ding-dong ditcher? Something felt a bit eerie about it, after all. But before Edward made it up the stairs, he heard a commotion, like a dozen men were trying to break down his back doors. He races back up to his room, grabs his shotgun, and runs to the back of the house. The back doors are shaking violently as if they are about to jump off the hinges, and the banging and banging and banging on the doors is almost deafening. However, when he looks out the window to see who is doing this, must be a mob of people, he thinks, he finds that there is no one outside. For hours, it seemed, the commotion continued. There would be a ringing of the doorbell and the banging of the back doors, and the cycle would repeat a couple times an hour. And then, at the stroke of midnight, the house became quiet again, as if nothing had ever happened. After his nerves had settled, Edward slowly opened the back door, shotgun in hand. He looked left and right, up and down, and seeing that the coast was clear, he walked the perimeter of his house, looking for any clue as to what had just happened, but he could find nothing. Eventually, Edward concludes that perhaps it was just a strange night. Maybe it was a group of naughty kids in the neighborhood having a bit of fun at his expense. But as he lay down next to his wife, he tossed and turned, trying to come up with a reasonable answer. He saw with his own eyes that there had been no one there. The next night, and for the next 3 weeks straight, the activity occurred as if on a strict schedule. At 5 p.m., the doorbell would ring, there'd be no one there, and then the back doors would start shaking and banging, and then there'd be no one there. And by midnight, the activity would cease entirely. The Smith family was about to be driven insane by these ghostly callers. Mr. Smith himself was not someone who believed in ghosts and things of that nature, but how else could he explain what he and his family were experiencing? After a few nights, he dumped ash from the fireplace in front of the back doors, hoping to get a shoe print or footprint of some kind. But as soon as the clock struck 12 and Edward opened those back doors, he saw that the ash lay undisturbed. How was this even possible? He eventually got the police involved simply because he didn't know what else to do or who to turn to. Edward invited police and extended family to come and spend the night, but try as they might to find some kind of explanation, they were at a loss. Police patrolled inside and outside of the home. One night, they even saw a brick fly through the dining room window inexplicably. The cops would later say that they were certain no earthly hands could have accomplished what they witnessed: the banging on the back doors, the incessant ring of the doorbell, or the flying brick. Once it reached the papers, neighbors, spiritualists, and amateur paranormal investigators gathered around the house at 136 Clinton Avenue to catch a glimpse of any ghostly activity. And from the neighbors, Edward learned that the previous owner had committed suicide, and they had moved in just a few weeks after. Upon hearing this, Edward was forced to believe he was dealing with the disgruntled ghost of the previous owner. Spiritualists and snake oil salesmen had been to the house, and whatever they did had no real effect, and so, just a couple days before Christmas, Edward took matters into his own hands. And, according to him, he prayed incessantly for the safety and tranquility of his home, as well as peace for the spirit that could not rest. And on the night of Christmas Eve, as the clock struck 5 p.m., and the family waited for that ring at the doorbell, all was silent. The ghostly caller never returned after that. The Smith family enjoyed the holidays without any disturbances, supernatural or otherwise, and as far as we know, the occupants at 136 Clinton Avenue remain of the earthly variety and nothing more. During the holiday season, many of us may take care to help the needy if we can, to dedicate our time or money to important causes. Because while Christmas should be a time of joy and togetherness, it isn't always the case for the members of society who have been left behind or who have slipped through the cracks. In the Middle Ages, the de Braose family ruled as lords over Bramber, Sussex, and lived in the castle Bramber. William de Braose, fourth Lord of Bramber, was once a court favorite of King John of England. But King John was infamous for his capricious relationships with the members of his court, frequently falling in and out with his lords for obscure or petty reasons. It is not known exactly why William of Bramber fell out of favor with King John. Officially, it was due to unpaid debts, but historians argue that the lengths King John went to punish William de Braose and his family suggests something far beyond money issues, perhaps something more personal. But whatever the case may be, King John pursued William de Braose throughout the British Isles, in Ireland, England, and Wales, where he was eventually found disguising himself as a beggar. He briefly allied himself with the Lords of Wales against King John, but was forced into exile in France, where he eventually died. However, before his exile, his wife and children were captured by King John. The legend goes that two of his children, a son and a daughter, were held beneath Castle Bramber, where they starved to death, or perhaps they were thrown into the streets with the other peasants and forced into a life of begging, a life which they were not accustomed to and eventually succumbed to. And so, every Christmas, the children of William de Braose can be seen staring mournfully at Bramber Castle or begging in the streets for food, wearing rags. Some have said they've even been chased and harassed by their ghosts, leaving them breathless and terrified as these children pursue them with supernatural speed, pale skin, and black, sunken eyes. Perhaps they appear every Christmas to remind those to consider the meek, the poor, the downtrodden during the season of giving. And perhaps they attack those who are not generous. That's the legend, anyway. In the annals of history, de Braose did have a son who died of starvation while imprisoned, although he was not a child. But as far as we know, he only had 4 sons, so who knows about the girl ghost that's seen. But perhaps it is no more than an urban legend that is rather creepy, no less. And I have a couple more tales for you before we delve into some Yuletide folklore from our ancient and pagan past. The first of which is the Christmas ghost of Wawel Castle in Krakow, Poland. And I know I'm probably pronouncing the castle name wrong, so I apologize. But anyway, the story goes that long ago, a mighty and terrifying dragon terrorized the citizenry of Krakow, Poland. Try as they might, the king and his mightiest warriors could not defeat the dragon. And so, the people lived in terror as the beast snatched with his sharp claws women and young girls each night. That was until a clever little shoemaker devised a plan. He instructed the people of Krakow to create decoys, sheepskin effigies stuffed with wheat and other materials, whatever they could find. But the secret ingredient to these decoys would be sulfur. Large amounts of sulfur were loaded into the makeshift dragon bait, and when night fell, the dragon would descend upon the people of Krakow one last time. The dragon swept through town, the people hid in their homes as it passed over, snatching up the dragon bait as it did. But the sulfur the dragon ingested made it uncontrollably thirsty. Screeching into the night, the dragon retreated to the river Vistula, where it began to hastily attempt to quench its thirst. And for whatever reason, the combination caused the dragon to explode in a grand display of fireworks and dragon guts. The lowly shoemaker had saved the day, and a monument of both the shoemaker and the dragon was erected in remembrance. But what do dragons have to do with Christmas? Well, not much apparently, but it's a cool story, and I wanted to tie it in somehow because I thought to myself, you know what? Christmas needs more dragons, exploding dragons specifically. But it does relate to a Christmas tradition said to occur each year below Wawel Castle in Krakow. In the bowels of this old castle is a secret meeting place known as the Dragon's Den. Killer name, by the way, and its name, of course, was inspired by the story of the mighty dragon that once terrorized their city. But it is also the burial place for the old kings of Poland. And in the Dragon's Den, the kings and aristocrats of Poland would meet in secret to discuss politics and other relevant matters. And it is said that to this day, the old kings of Poland meet each year on Christmas to talk about the good old days, to regale each other with stories of forgotten glory and, manly shit. They have been seen as see through specters sitting around an equally ghostly table and have even been known to look at and acknowledge those who may stumble upon their Christmas meeting. But aside from Christmas, the old kings of Poland are occasionally seen wandering about the castle. Others have overheard whispers and hearty laughter coming from the dragon's den. The gesture of an old king is also said to haunt the castle walls, even appearing along the barracks as a warning when there is bad news coming. But as for those old kings and their Christmas meeting, I like to think that they meet up for Polish Christmas each year to shoot the shit, and who knows, maybe they even talk a little shit about all of us knuckleheads down here in the real world. It certainly has the makings for an interesting premise for a Christmas ghost story, anyway. But y'all know I'm partial to Victorian ghost stories. After all, aren't almost all ghosts somehow from the Victorian era? It certainly seems so at times, and perhaps that's just because Victorians love to tell ghost stories, and maybe we've let go of that tradition a little bit. And I also love to talk about haunted hotels, so in this last Christmas ghost story, before we get into some ancient folklore, we will be talking about the sweet May Yohe of the Old Hotel Bethlehem, a name fitting for a discussion on Christmas ghosts. Like any old Victorian hotel, Hotel Bethlehem has its fair share of ghostly tenants. But the most beloved of these ghosts is arguably that of a woman named Mary, or May, Yohe. May was the granddaughter of the owner of Hotel Bethlehem, then called the Eagle Hotel, and she was known as a lively, boisterous child who loved to dance and sing. And she loved to dance and sing so much, in fact, that her talents landed her in the glamorous opera houses of Europe, as well as all across the United States. A talented performer, May Yohe made a name for herself and even married a British lord, finding herself among the British aristocracy and was on her way to become quite the socialite herself. That was until her marriage fell apart and she was forced to return home to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which wouldn't have been so bad. She had nothing but fond memories of home, and as she grew older, she longed more so for a quiet, comfortable life as opposed to the hustle and bustle of a showgirl. However, her love life again took a turn for the worst when her second husband ended up robbing her of all her money and abandoning her. She then returned to the old hotel until her death years later. Before she died, she recalled that her childhood at the hotel had been the best and happiest years of her life. Around Christmas time, Guests of the hotel have been known to see Miss Yohe attending to the Christmas tree, arranging the ornaments as she sees fit. May was known to love the holidays, and some say they have heard her singing Christmas carols in the beautiful voice she was known for. And should our spirits live on in some way after we die, it is perhaps comforting to think that we may return to a time and a place where we felt happiest. And okay, so who is ready for some Christmas creatures, not ghosts per se, because I know I love to hear about the non ghostly residents of the supernatural world as well. And yes, we have plenty of Christmas monsters and interesting beings. Probably a lot of you have heard about Krampus by now, aka the Anti-Claus, and we'll talk about him near the end of the episode, but I want to talk about some lesser known Christmas legends first. For example, we have the Yule Cat in Iceland, a monstrous black cat who crawls out from another world each Christmas Eve to devour the meals of naughty children before she devours the children themselves. We also have the terrifying Christmas witch known as Frau Perkta. Frau Perkta is a remnant of creepy pre Christian mythology that our European pagan ancestors left to us. This hag like being, native mostly to Germany and Austria, dresses in dingy rags, has a beaked nose made of iron, and in general resembles your typical wrinkly old crone. And to add to the creepiness, she has one large misshapen foot, and one of the last things a child may hear before being taken by the witch is the eerie dragging noise of her foot. She is a shapeshifter and has been known to fly through the night sky with horned night demons throughout the time of the winter solstice, searching for misbehaving children to kidnap, and well, we can only assume they get eaten or sacrificed in some way. Whatever happens to them can't be good. Some versions of the legend say that Frau Perkta slits the stomachs of bad children, replacing their insides with straw and stone. And geez, I gotta say, pagan gods and pagan monsters really were the gnarliest beings around. And I just know that no matter how many times parents warned their rambunctious children of Frau Perkta, they still were willing to test their fate. Growing up here, the worst that could potentially happen to you is you get a lump of coal in your stocking, not a lump of sticks and stones in your stomach after being disemboweled. But I bet you didn't know that werewolves have their part in the old Christmas folklore of Europe as well, particularly in Poland and parts of northeastern Europe. Some believed that babies born on Christmas Day were cursed to become werewolves. The logic behind this being that it was an insult to be born on the same day as Jesus, because the dude who was all about loving your neighbor and the golden rule and all that apparently gets really pissed off if you have the audacity to be born on his birthday. It also could stem from the idea that werewolves were only born around the winter solstice and changed into werewolves during the winter solstice specifically. In part one, I mentioned that the winter solstice was the time of year in the northern hemisphere when Europeans believed that the veil was thinnest between our world and the world of the dark unknown, not Halloween necessarily. It was, and still is obviously, the darkest and longest night of the year, and all sorts of supernatural beings reigned over this night in particular. That could be anything from vampires and witches to werewolves, ghouls, and goblins. And maybe our Victorian ancestors were tapping into this old tradition, or perhaps there is just something about this time of year that naturally draws the mind towards the dark and mysterious. But one of the most interesting dark characters of old Christmas lore is Krampus, the infamous Anti-Claus. A remnant of the pagan past, Krampus was said to be the son of Hel, the Norse goddess of the underworld, and later on, the evil companion of Saint Nicholas. While Krampus like characters can be found in various parts of Central and Northern Europe, Krampus originates from Germany. Krampus is a half goat, half man demon who ultimately punishes bad children during Christmas time. He is covered with coarse black hair, has long goat horns, and a fiendish red long tongue, complete with yellow fangs. While winter solstice rituals associated with Krampus during ancient paganism may unfortunately be lost to time, we may have a clue about what they might have been like. We know at least that Krampus was not so fond of misbehaving children. On his night, known as Krampus Night, the fiend of the winter solstice would throw evil children into his sack and then drag them to hell where he would then devour them. I can imagine like ancient German parents being like, okay, Hans, don't be mean to your sister, or else an evil demon from hell is going to kidnap you and eat you for dinner. Seems a bit drastic, but it was, of course, a different and much harsher time to be alive. In the milder versions of Krampus folklore, the goat demon of Christmas punishes ill behaved children by beating them with sticks and branches. The good children spend the day after Krampus night enjoying their gifts, while the bad children must spend the day recovering from their injuries. And there are, of course, countless other creepy Christmas legends and ghost stories from the Victorian age and beyond, but for now, I'll go ahead and leave this episode here. I hope you all enjoyed the holiday season, and I hope it was free of any evil Christmas demons from any of the stories we talked about today. Perhaps we're lucky in that the only Christmas demons we have to deal with today are the Karens that lurk in department stores and the shysters that raise prices during the holidays but put a red sticker over it and act like it's some huge sale. Next time, we'll be kicking off the new year with a two-part series on the Men in Black. So until then, enjoy the rest of your vacation if you're lucky enough to have one, and see you next year, as they say. Take care, everyone. Thank you.